Hi everyone, welcome to the January 29th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragon, and I'll be joined in just a moment by my usual co-host, Craig Milkowski. We've got plenty of handicapping to do on the podcast this week. We'll be hopping all around the country. There's really some interesting stakes racing going on in almost every corner of the United States, so we'll visit 4 different venues on this podcast. The focus, though, really is, as it is often at this time of year, on the 3-year-old Kentucky Derby prep races, and we'll be discussing 2 of those, starting out at Gulfstream Park, talking about the Holy Bull. Also on that card, we'll mention the Sweetest Chance Stakes, an interesting 3-year-old filly stake that's taking place right before that Holy Bull. Then we'll hop on over to Santa Anita, where they're running a pretty strong edition of the Robert B. Lewis. Plenty of 2-year-olds that just turned 3 that had pretty impressive resumes that are running there, including some up-and-coming recent maiden winners. Then we'll go over to Oaklawn Park, where they're running the American Beauty on Saturday for the filly and mare sprinters. And we'll finish things up on Sunday at Sam Houston with their stakes-laden card there. We'll talk about 2 of the turf stakes races, the Pulse Power Turf Sprint and the John B. Connolly Turf Cup for the Turf Marathoners. So plenty to talk about on the podcast this week, Craig. I'm obviously, though, most excited about those 3-year-old Derby prep races.
Yeah, of course, they're always the most exciting. It's just so cool this year to be back on a normal Derby schedule as compared to last year. I think there's a lot of things we're all looking forward to getting back to normal, and hopefully this is the first step. And I do kind of like weeks like this where we're basically touring the entire southern part of the country from Florida all the way out to California. So a good diverse group of races, but yeah, the 3-year-olds are always the ones I think most people are excited about. And given kind of the state of the older horse divisions right now, I think most people would be looking at these the hardest.
Yeah, there was plenty to choose from this week among the stakes races, so we kind of got to cherry pick the ones that were our favorites. So we'll start with the Sweetest Chant, that Grade 3 event at Gulfstream Park, the race that's going to be run right before that Derby prep, the Holy Bull. This is the 10th race on their Saturday card. Going a mile on the turf for the 3-year-old fillies, and the favorite on the morning line is the number 4 Cone Lima for Todd Pletcher. We had talked about this filly's last victory in the Ginger Brew when she was basically unchallenged on the front end and just cruised to an easy 3 1/4 length victory over Honey Pants, who's also in this race. She was visually impressive in that spot, but I think the waters are getting deeper here.
Yeah, I mean, of those 2 you mentioned, I would probably look for Honey Pants to reverse the tables here in this one over the, I think it is the morning line favorite. But you know, in this race, it's a field of 8. It's the pace projector has it as a fast pace, which also would tend to go against Cone Lima. So I actually like another horse quite a bit in here, and that's White Frost. She was the horse that was so impressive, breaking her maiden last time out when moved to the turf for Bill Mott. And I just really liked how she did it. She looked good. She came from off the pace. She closed into a slow pace and just won really easy. Got the biggest speed figure of anyone in this field. And that 111 TimeformUS speed figure doesn't look like it's any kind of fluke because that race has already produced 2 next out winners who won with similar figures. And I just have no knocks on this horse whatsoever. So I'm going to take a shot with White Frost.
Yeah, I knew we'd be on the same page in this race. We talked about White Frost's maiden win on the Pacecast a few weeks ago when she ran that race, and I had picked her in that race because she had a big turf pedigree, and I know I was really jazzed about her performance because I think both of the top 2 finishers from that maiden race that White Frost won looked pretty talented. Lihana, who was second, she was a first-time starter at a big price for Cherie DeVoe. She came back and won a pretty nice maiden race at the Fairgrounds next time. That's one of the next out winners that you were mentioning. And White Frost, I mean, she just flat out ran her to the wire. The pace was slow, as you said. 3 of those fractions are color-coded in blue in the TimeformUS PPs. And you see the final time number is just a 102, which is right in line with the 79 buyer that she got. But she gets such a bump up from the closing fractions to the pace-aided TimeformUS speed figure of 111. And that just gives her a significant advantage over this field if she can run back to anything like that. I was a big fan of her Damn Miss Frost when she was running, and it looks like White Frost definitely has some of her turf ability. As for others in this race, and I just should say before I move on, I don't think we're going to get the 9-2 on White Frost. I think this is the kind of horse that a lot of people might land on, but she also might not be favored in this race because Cone Lima does seem like the kind of horse that has to take plenty of money for Todd Pletcher at Gulfstream. Moving on to some other horses that I think are somewhat interesting in here. The number 6, Domain Expertise for Chad Brown. Obviously, she's coming in a little light on speed figures, but she looked pretty good last time at Tampa. The horse, though, that I think is most interesting at a bigger price to get it underneath is the number 8, Director's Cut. She lost an allowance race last time at Gulfstream Park, but if you watch that trip, she was 3 wide without cover for the entire race around both turns. That's just not usually a successful trip on the turf, and she did get run down at the end of that race, but I think if she can get a better trip this time, she can be somewhere in the mix. I don't think she's going to beat White Frost, but I'd use her in exotics.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. I'm going to be keying on White Frost and definitely trying to beat Cone Lima. I mean, she's going to be tough, but I do think there's some other pace in here. And as you said, the waters just get deeper. And on turf, I usually think as the horses mature, it gets harder and harder to win up front, particularly when there's other speed.
Yeah, you were mentioning the pace projector. The presence of that number 7 Lioness of Brittany is really going to complicate things for Cone Lima, because if you watched the prior races of Lioness of Brittany, she is really fast. If you that last turf sprint that she ran at Gulfstream, there were 3 horses dueling for the front end. She put them away. The race was dominated by closers, but she somehow held on. She's actually a talented turf sprinter, but going a mile, she could be a real problem for Cone Lima. Let's move on to that other race we're going to talk about from Gulfstream Park. That's the main attraction, the Grade 3 Holy Bowl, the 11th race on the card, offering 10 Kentucky Derby qualifying points to the winner of this race. They're going a mile and a 16th with that short stretch run at Gulfstream Park, and I have to differ a little bit with the morning line maker here. I would have to think that the number 6 Prime Factor is going to be the favorite in this race, and probably a clear-cut favorite. This horse turned a lot of heads in his debut for Todd Pledger, going 6 furlongs back in December 12th. He won by almost 9 lengths, was wrapped up at the end. Irad Ortiz comes back for the assignment here, and he's certainly bred to stretch out in distance, so I think we really have to start by having an opinion about this horse.
Yeah, I would agree. It's funny, when I was making my notes, I actually called him the favorite a couple times because I didn't pay attention to the morning line, and I just assumed he would be the favorite. So when I actually did look, I was a little surprised, but I'm with you. I think he'll be the favorite over Greatest Honor in here. But that said, I mean, he didn't do anything wrong first time out, but I don't want to bet him as the favorite, and I don't mind taking a shot against. It won't surprise me if he wins by any means. He was very good, but I think there are some others as well that have a shot. The horse who is the favorite on the morning line, Greatest Honor, I don't particularly care for him either. It took him 4 chances to break his maiden. He finally did so at 2-5, and for me, he just hasn't run particularly quick. I know you could make the argument he had some trouble last time out. He's, he's actually run longer than this before, but it took him a little while to get the 2 turns where he seems to be better. But again, at a short price, I don't want to see horses that may have to improve it. In his case, a good 7, 8, 9 points. So I'm going to go to more towards the inside, which I haven't mentioned yet. It's most people know it, but at a mile and a 16th at Gulfstream, it's really tough from the outside because it's just such a short run to the first turn. You got to use your speed, try to get over, get hung out wide. And if you get hung out wide, you're in big trouble there. So the horse I wound up landing on was the 3 horse Papatoo. He's definitely a bit of a price in here, but I really liked his last race behind that Mutasabeek. I forget the name of that race. The Mucho Macho Man it was. I'm not sure where that race came from him. He had won his first couple out, but he didn't run particularly quick. He showed up in the Saratoga Special and the Hopeful where he did no running whatsoever, but he took off almost 4 months and he came back, and I don't think it was anything fluky about that effort. I thought it was a good race by him. I like that he has the inside draw. I think he'll be pretty close up, and for me, it's hard to pass up a big price for a horse whose speed figure puts him right in the mix.
Yeah, I'll get to him in a little bit. Prime Factor, who I agree is going to be favored in here. I think there are a couple reasons to knock him if he's going to be a very short price. One is that looking in the TimeformUS PPs, you see that red color-coded race rating box, and that indicates a speed favoring surface on December 12th. And if you look through all the charts for that day, I think it's pretty clear that speed was very dangerous on that card. That was the same day where Ladies Island got carried along on the front end to win that dirt sprint stakes race. And that was the same day that tax wired the field in the Harlan's Holiday, and you saw what he came back to do in the Pegasus World Cup, but not too much. So I'd be a little skeptical of horses that showed speed on that card, especially ones that won by large margins and are coming back now. And Prime Factor's stretching out, and he's trying a graded stakes for the first time off that debut victory, but if you look up Todd Pletcher's stats in DRF Formulator with this move, they're not strong. It's kind of surprisingly bad. On dirt, with horses that won their debuts that are trying a graded stakes in their second start, he's just 2 for 26 over the past 5 years, 8%, a 51-cent ROI, and he hasn't won with a horse in that sample since 2016. He's actually 0 for his last 20 with second-time starters in graded stakes races that won their debuts. So just for all of those reasons, I'm not willing to accept a short price on this horse. I'm a little more encouraged by the number 7 Greatest Honor. I think he'll probably be the second choice in this race. And I hear you, Craig, that he hasn't run particularly fast yet, but he kind of reminds me of your typical Shug McGahee horse that's taken a little while to come along, even though he showed some promise in his debut. His speed figures have only improved gradually since then, but now that he's won his maiden race, these are the kind of Shug horses that sometimes, if they're well-bred and they've shown potential, they go on to ascend pretty quickly. We saw that with his Kentucky Derby winner Orb, who had a very similar profile to this horse in his first few starts, ran well in his debut, took about 3 or 4 starts to break his maiden, and then he just never stopped winning. And Greatest Honor, he's going to have to run faster to beat this field, but I liked his maiden victory last time. As you said, he had a little trouble, but there was an incident in the first turn that caused him to swerve around a stricken rival. But he launched a sustained run from the back of the pack to get up for the victory that day. The third place finisher, Another Duke, came back and won a maiden special weight at Gulfstream last Saturday on the Pegasus World Cup undercard. So he's handled this distance already in a race where many do have the distance and the 2-turn question to answer. So I'm going to land on Greatest Honor here. And if he's around 5-2 or 3-1, I think that's a fair price on him. As for the others, I mean, I would say that Papatu, the horse that you picked, is the interesting price horse. I don't know if he's going to be 15-1 because it seems like based on the speed figure he got last time, he's got to be shorter than that. But he did get a number in the Mucho Macho Man that makes him a major player in this race. I'll be interested to see if horses do run back to that Mucho Macho Man number. You're not the only one who had it a very fast race. The buyer has it fast as well. It's just almost everybody in there improved by 10 to 15 points off their prior best. And I'm always a little leery of those races. You do see that happen with 3-year-olds, especially at this time of the year, that they'll suddenly improve all at once. But I just want to see some horses run back to that number before I really bet them. The horse that I'm kind of against in here that could take some money is the number 8 Sitting on Go. A speed figure that I think has been validated as not being what we thought it was at the time is that Iroquois that he won. Horses just haven't run back to it, including him, and I've got to see him pop another big figure before I bet a horse like that.
Yeah, I was going to mention him. He's the kind of horse, I mean, speed figure or not, I'm always going to be against. Something just seems to win a miss with that horse. They're pressing on with him anyway. But usually these horses will just keep getting bet off that early 2-year-old form, and I just want no parts of him whatsoever. It was good info you said about Todd Pletcher, because he actually has 2 doing the same exact thing in here. And the only other thing I have to add on this race is both Prime Factor and the Mounts maiden wins have not proven particularly strong. Now, granted, Prime Factor won by 8 lengths, but literally nobody's come out of that race to do much running at all. And the same thing goes for a Mount as well. So I was trying to make a case for a Mount when I was studying, and I just couldn't come up with it. So yeah, not a whole lot more for me to add. I will say about Papatu's figure, I do time all those races at Gulfstream because they have a lot of problems with the mile races, and they're really inconsistent with when they hit the button or however it works. I don't know the exact mechanism, but I time every single one of those, and they're all timed really consistently when I make the figures.
That's good info, and I wasn't doubting the final time or the figure. Yeah, it's just, sometimes these great races do come back atypically fast, and you want to see them validated, or at least I do sometimes, but I have no doubt that the time of that race, or the one that you base the speed figure on, is correct. And just to I don't want to spend the entire podcast on this one race, but just to kind of wrap up Prime Factor, I gave all these negative reasons about him. I mean, I did pick him second in this race. I think he can certainly win, and if you watch some of his workouts on XBTV, they're available, and I suggest you do, if you use that resource, if you can. he's working very well coming into this race. He looks like the kind of Pletcher horse that's sitting on a big effort. Just at a short price, I'm looking for reasons to bet against horses like this. Moving on to that other Derby prep, also offering 10 points to the winner towards the Kentucky Derby out at Santa Anita. That's the Grade 3 Robert B. Lewis going a mile in the 16th. And this race came up very strong. You've got the runner-up from last year's Breeders' Cup Juvenile. You've got one of the faster 3-year-olds that we've seen anywhere in the country, and the other Baffert horse, Medina Spirit. Yet last year's Los Alamitos Futurity winner, Spielberg, some impressive maiden winners. This race really has it all.
It does, and I was surprised. I mean, we're used to these Southern California races, particularly for 3-year-olds, showing up with, 5, maybe 6 horse fields and 3 or 4 trained by Bob Baffert. So this was a pleasant surprise when I opened the PPs. But unfortunately for me, I wasn't able to get much past the favorites, and I really did like Medina Spirit's last race. I thought he was really good, chasing Life is Good. He never gave up. He draws inside this time. He ran that huge speed figure. So for me, unless somebody could convince me there was a reason he was going to regress this time out, I just think he's going to be really tough to beat. Of the others in here, I'm not a fan of Spielberg at all. He's a horse who's run a bunch of times already. He always seems to get bad. He won a pretty weak Los Al Futurity where he barely beat a maiden, albeit that horse did come back to win easily last time in the Great One. But I've just never been a big fan of Spielberg's. It's hard for me to see him putting too much pressure on Medina Spirit coming from the same barn. So I'm going to pass on him. Out of the other favorites, I'd probably lean towards Hot Rod Charlie. He was runner-up in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, of course, at just boxcar prices. Ran a nice speed figure that day. He got a 113, but we haven't seen a whole lot out of that Juvenile yet to really be too definitive on how, great or strong. I know Keep Me in the Mind came back to win in Kentucky after that, but he did so with a very slow speed figure. Most of the other horses that came out of it haven't done a lot of running, including Sitting on Go, who we already talked about. So I'm going to stick with Medina Spirit over him, but I would prefer Hot Rod Charlie to Spielberg. The other horse who's bet on the morning line, Wipe the Slate, third time out for Doug O'Neill. No knocks on his last race. He broke his maiden easily at 7 furlongs, ran a nice 105 speed figure. But again, it's not like this horse is going to be 10-1. He could easily be close to the second choice. He'll probably be third or fourth choice, but just not the kind of horse I want to take at the kind of price he'll be, because he's going to have to improve quite a bit to beat the favorite.
Yeah, it's a fascinating race. We've got those 2 Baffert horses and those 2 Doug O'Neill horses, and they figure to be the 4 shortest prices on the morning line. Like you, among the Bafferts, I think Medina Spirit is the one you want, and I think he's just way the horse to beat in this spot. I mean, I'm not one that usually bets the Kentucky Derby future wager, but he went off at 24-1 in the pool that recently closed. Basically the exact same price as that unraced Bob Baffert horse Bezos, who's created so much hype based on his workouts. But I mean, nobody's respecting this horse Medina Spirit. I know that he finished in the same race as Life is Good last time, and some people think that Life is Good was basically geared down and the plan was to only win by 3/4 of a length last time. I don't know about that. I mean, this horse Medina Spirit was running at him. He seems like one that's really going to relish added distance based on the way he finishes off his races. And I know he's a pretty inexpensive horse compared to some others in Bob Baffert's barn, but he looks like the real deal to me. And it's not like he has to improve that much on that 118 TimeformUS speed figure he got last time to hit the board in the Kentucky Derby, as long as he handles a 1.25 miles and progresses that far. So he looks like the real deal. And if you've watched some of his recent workouts, he outworked Spielberg recently, so it looks like he's holding his form coming into this race. He just looks like a deserving favorite and the horse to beat in my book. As for those Doug O'Neill horses, Hot Rod Charlie, he ran really well in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile. I think the jury's still out on how strong that Juvenile really was. I mean, Jackie's Warrior was a proven horse coming into that race, but he didn't really get a chance to show that he could do with that crazy pace scenario. And Hot Rod Charlie ran very well within the context of that race, making an early move into that quick pace, but he's just a one-hit wonder at this point, so you do want to see him do it again. I do prefer him a little bit, though, to Wipe the Slate. We'll see how far Wipe the Slate ultimately wants to go. he's looked good in both career starts. He's one of two in here that was beaten by Life is Good in that maiden race back in November at Del Mar, but he came back going 7 furlongs last time and earned an improved speed figure, so he can certainly continue progressing. But the horse that intrigues me in this race at a bit of a price, and the one that I'm going to go to as my top pick, even though I acknowledge that Medina Spirit's the most likely winner, just as a value play, I'm going to land on the number 5, Roman Centurion. He's the other horse that finished behind Life is Good in that November maiden race at Del Mar, but he stretched out to 2 turns last time at Santa Anita, and I was pretty taken by this performance when he wins off by 3 3/4 lengths for Simon Callahan. That seemed like a pretty loaded maiden race. You had some horses who had already shown ability in there, and Roman Centurion was far back in the early going, made a long, sustained run on the far turn. He struck the front at about the 8th pole and really was striding out impressively past the wire. And if you watch the gallop out, he goes about 15 lengths clear into the clubhouse turn. He was really finishing off that race strongly. I wasn't anticipating he was going to come back in a spot that's quite this tough, and he does have to get faster to beat a horse like Medina Spirit, but I think there's real potential with this horse, Roman Centurion, and maybe he doesn't win this race, maybe he just is a closing third or something like that, but I think this one has a future down the line, so I'd watch him on the Derby Trail, and I'll take a shot and pick him on top here.
Yeah, there was a reason I kind of ignored him, and that's because I remembered us discussing him on the Pacecast, and I knew how much you liked him, so I didn't want to steal too much thunder. Unlike you, I'm going to stick with Medina Spirit, but I fully expect him to run well, and I think as the distances get longer, as you mentioned, that he's going to do even better. So really promising colt, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. This is probably the race I most want to see on Saturday.
Yeah, it's one of those races that could really establish one of the favorites for the Kentucky Derby all the way back in January, given how strong it's come up. Let's move on to a couple of those other venues that I mentioned at the top of the show. Next up is Oaklawn Park, where on Saturday they're running the American Beauty, going 6 furlongs for the fillies and mares, and I think the name of the game in this race, Craig, is speed, because there is a ton of it in this race, and none of other is faster than Ladies Island, who I did mention a little bit earlier in the Pacecast in the forecast as a horse that had ridden a speed bias last time, but speed bias or not, this filly is going to the front, and she's going to ask them to come and catch her, and we'll see if they can, but you know what the plan's going to be.
Yeah, this was a race when I first saw the past performances come out, and they come out really early for Oaklawn. So I think I tweeted on maybe Tuesday that I'm really looking forward to betting against Frank's Raquette. She's the morning line favorite at 2-1. She's a horse no knocks on her. She wins plenty, but she's just... Bill Mott's found tons of just easy spots with her where she basically couldn't lose. And then he kind of threw her to the wolves in the Breeders' Cup Sprint, where frankly I thought she had no chance, and it turned out she didn't have a chance. But I think a lot of people are going to look for a rebound here, but I just don't particularly like her. I think she's still overrated. People are going to see that Breeders' Cup Sprint and think it was something special when, in fact, it was probably the weakest Breeders' Cup Sprint that I can ever remember seeing. If you look through her past performances, she's been in a race 3 times that have what we show in TimeformUS as a red pace, and every time she has, she's gotten beat. So with horses in here like the aforementioned Ladies Island, who's just a speedball, and then Amy's Challenge, who is, I mean, if Ladies Island wasn't in here, I'd think Amy's Challenge would be a big problem for Frank's Raquette. So having to deal with the two of them, I'm going to just think this race kind of falls apart. So I went to the inside in a horse, French Empire, 6-year-old mare. She's been running on the synthetic lately, but she has our best late pace rating. She's run well on dirt plenty times before, and she's just the one horse that I'm confident in when I look at the past performances that I know is going to be coming late. There's a lot of other horses in here who are shown farther back on the pace projector, but when you really look through their past performances, they're more or less speed horses. They're just going to get outrun early here, so I don't have a lot of faith in them being able to close, but I do at French Empire, and if I could get anything near that 10-1, I'm going to be all over her.
Well, that's not a pick that I was expecting from you, Craig. Usually I feel like I have an idea of where you're going to go in these races, as I'm sure you do me. She is a closer in a race that's loaded with speed. I'm not going to differ with you there. And her trainer can be very dangerous. I kind of viewed her as more of a turf synth kind of horse, but she does have a couple of dirt races in there, and I can't argue with the setup she's going to get, and she'll be a big price. So I wish you luck with her. I think there are some other ways to go in this race, though. Just to finish up Frank's Rocket, though, I'm kind of on the same page as you. I think she's gotten very good trips in most of the races where she's been successful. She's got plenty of slow paces peppering her running lines. And there are 4 really fast horses in this race, including some need the lead types like Amy's Challenge, Ladies Island, even Best Kept Secret, who's a bigger price. She's a need the lead type who's got to be gunning from the outside. Frank's Rocket has stalked and pounced before, but she hasn't come from 4th or 5th like she might be in the early going here. So I'm just a little leery of her getting the right trip at a short price. I think there is another way to go in this race, and like just an obvious closer that you're supposed to use, and that's the number 5, Wildwood's Beauty. I know this horse hasn't won in a little while, and she's done her better work going 7 furlongs, but I don't really care about that now that she's getting in a 6 furlong race with this much pace. She's supposed to get the right trip, and she is one of those horses that's been successful coming from much farther back in the pack before. She can adapt her running style to be up close to the pace or come from much farther behind, and I know that she's got some recent performances that are just so-so, but she also hasn't had the best trips or pace scenarios in some recent starts, like last time out when Amy's Challenge was just able to get away on a pretty moderate pace up front. I thought she closed decently to be 3rd that day in that race at Keeneland, and I just think she fits really well against this field, especially if horses like Frank's Rocket and Ladies Island don't bring their A efforts because of the pace scenario.
Yeah, she's my second pick in this race. I mean, I have no problems with her whatsoever. She's definitely more proven on the dirt than my pick, French Empire. I was just a little bit leery that her best races seem to come when she's not on the lead, but pretty close to it. So if it gets really hot, maybe that would hurt her. But I have no problems with her. For me, between those two, it just came down to price. I think either one of them could win. I haven't looked at the whole card yet, but if I were playing pick 3s or pick 4s, I would definitely use the 2 of them.
One other horse that I want to mention in this race that's somewhat interesting, who I'd make my second pick behind Wildwood's Beauty, is the number 2. She's So Majestic. I think it's possible that she's really improved for John Ortiz, and it's not apparent in her form, because she blew the start in her first race off the claim back in June. Then she ran a big speed figure at Ellis Park in July in a race going this distance. And then they tried that Derby City Distaff where she had no chance, especially not when she was trying to chase the pace of Serengeti Empress. So she's really only had one true effort where she had a chance since the claim. And that was a speed figure that puts her in the mix here. She's one that is a stalker, and maybe she gets a little discouraged by racing too far back in the early going, but she'll be a price in this race as well, and I wouldn't discount her because she may really be improved. So she's just one I would use underneath.
Yeah, that's a good point about the hidden form. My one concern was she does tend to like to be up close, but she's going to be a price, so certainly no knocks on her.
Okay, let's finish things up on this podcast on Sunday at Sam Houston, where they're running a ton of stakes races, including the Houston Ladies Classic. We're not going to discuss that one. We're instead going to talk about 2 turf stakes, starting with the Pulse Power Turf Sprint, race 5 on that Sunday card. Going the 5 furlongs on the turf. We've got a large field here. It looks pretty wide open. I think the lukewarm favorite on the morning line is the number 7 Fast Boat, and no argument that Fast Boat's been facing better fields in some of his recent starts. It's been a little while since he's won a race, and I think his best performance will beat this field. He just doesn't always bring it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a big field of 12. We have it labeled as a fast pace on the pace projector, which is no surprise when you have a field this big of some of the fastest turf sprinters we're going to see. There's plenty of speed signed on, so not a surprise on the pace projector. But I would say I still usually look for horses with some tactical speed because, I mean, after all, they're only going 5 furlongs, and sometimes by the time the closers get going, the race is already over and it's too late. In this case, there's so many directions you could go. I mean, people could name probably 8 horses, and I'd be like, yeah, okay, I can see that one. But I eventually had it narrowed down to Tiger Blood and Fast Boat. And just on the factor of the price alone, I settled on Tiger Blood. I really like what Mike Maker's been doing with him. He claimed him about 3 starts back. And as we've talked about him many times, he's a guy that he doesn't really pop first time out, even second time out, but he usually seems to have a game plan with his horses. And for me, this seems to be one where the plan looks like they want to get him to come from off the pace a little bit, because he was a horse who always went to the lead if he could. He just ran as fast as he could, as far as he could. And that's totally changed in Mike Maker's barn. And last time out, he had a really tough start at Gulfstream and what was a really tough allowance race that day. He dropped back to last at the start. He only finished 5th, but he was beating a length. But if you watch that race, I just really liked how he was finishing it off. And I think with a clean start and given the pace setup, that he is a horse I definitely will pick to outrun his odds here. And at 10-1, I got to take a shot with him.
Yeah, he's one of the ones I'm considering. I'm certainly not against him, and I think coming from off the pace in a race that features as much early speed as this could work. I wouldn't be quite as optimistic with you about this being a plan to take him off the pace. To me, watching his races, it just seems like now in his 8-year-old season or late in his 7-year-old season, he's just lost the early speed that he once has. I mean, in some of those races, it looked like they were trying to get him forward and he just couldn't get there. And I'm always a little concerned when these older horses start to lose their early speed, because it often corresponds or precedes a form decline. So I'm a little worried about that with Tiger Blood, because some of his recent efforts are just a little lackluster for him. But he does have the back races that make him a real contender here. So I'd use him, especially if he's anywhere near that 10-1. Fast Boat. He's the horse to beat. I have really nothing clever to say about him. He's been facing some tougher fields out of town. That race that Maniwa won a few weeks ago at Fairgrounds, that was just a better group than this. So the slight class relief could really work for him. And he's got a running style that should suit this race, because he's got tactical speed, but he can come from a little farther off it. I'm using him. The horse, though, I'd make my top pick is the number 3, Karotari. I know that it seems like he's lost his form, kind of like maybe Tiger Blood has, but he's coming off a layoff here, and I think if you kind of sift through his 2020 performances, they're not as bad as they seem. He ran well to win that race on soft turf at Ellis Park 2 back. Tiger Blood had a trip in there, but I'm not even sure that Karotari likes soft turf that much, and he still won that race. And before that, he didn't run well in a few races at Churchill Downs. I don't really know what was going on there, but he is a horse that in the past has liked a harder turf course. So maybe he'll get that at Sam Houston on Sunday night. And he definitely has the back races that make him a huge player in here. So coming off the layoff, I would take a shot with him. I don't know if he's going to be 8-1, but he just seems like an old classy horse that might be able to wake up in a race like this.
Yeah, I've got no problem with him. The only other note I wanted to make, you mentioned Fast Boat. He's kind of been facing tougher competition. And it's interesting you say that, because with these turf sprints, sometimes it's really hard to tell. I mean, this is just a $100,000 stakes race, same as his last one. And the one before that was $75,000. None of them graded. But if you look at our race ratings, those are all in the 120s. And in fact, Fast Boat hasn't run in a race that wasn't in the upper or mid to low to mid 120s in quite a while. The last time he was at Churchill, when he won pretty easily. So it's just a case where with turf sprinters, because they don't often have a lot of spots to pick from, you really have to look at the fields they were in against. And when you look at his, you see Arkidust and Leinster and Maniwa, and you just know if those horses were in here, they'd be the favorite. So just pointing out, you have to dig a little bit deeper to really find class. You can't just look at the purse or the grade, because these horses only have so many spots, and it's kind of a crapshoot where the strong races turn up.
I completely agree with that. I think that's a really good point about the turf sprinters. It does depend on who shows up in these races. Moving on to that final race we'll discuss on this podcast, that other turf race on Sunday night at Sam Houston, and that's the 1.5 mile John B. Connolly Turf Cup Grade 3 event, going that marathon distance. And Mike Maker seems like he always has multiple horses to run in this race. That's certainly the case this year. He's got a few horses in here, though not the morning line favorite. That honor goes to Spooky Channel, who, I mean, he's just the class of this race. He's coming out of a tough spot in the Fort Lauderdale. He's won going longer distances before. He's way the horse to beat, but I know that one of us is probably going to pick a Mike Maker horse to beat him.
Yeah, there is zero chance that I'm not going to pick a Mike Maker horse at this point in these 1.5 mile races. I've kind of been gradually coming around to that, and then when I don't, I usually wind up getting burned. So maybe it's one of these where, I'm going to show up to the funeral instead of the wedding, but I'm going with the Mike Maker horses. I'm probably going to box them in the exacta, but if I had to make a top pick, I'm actually going to go for some of the longer prices. I'm not a big fan of Conviction Trade. I mean, he ran okay in that 2 mile race at Gulfstream, but the figure wasn't all that much. I wasn't in love with that one. It was pretty weak field, if you ask me. And I'm going to go back to what generally is his MO and pick the 3-horse, A Journey to Freedom. This will be his 4th race off the claim. He's kind of been running at shorter distances, and I almost feel like this is what he's been pointed to. I could be totally wrong on that and turn out that, he's just the other Mike Maker in here, but I think he's going to offer value, and it just seems like I've read this book before. When I look at these PPs, I can picture 6 other horses at least that have had similar looking running lines at shorter distances, and they just seem to run better when they get to this distance. So I'm going to make A Journey to Freedom my top pick, and it was actually a close call over Marzo because I think Marzo's run some really good races. He's had some races where he's eclipsed the 120 TimeformUS speed figure mark, and he's just kind of a question mark on form, but I'm not going to hold that last race on the synthetic against him. I think it was the first time he'd ever run on synthetic. He was in against Set Piece, a horse who's almost unbeatable on that stuff right now, so I think he's going to run a good race too, despite what looks like some pretty shaky form if you just look at the finish position of his last 5 or 6 races.
Yeah, I had an inkling we might be on the same page in this one. Like you, I think A Journey to Freedom is really interesting. He'd be my top pick also. And it does feel like he's supposed to be the best price of these 3 Mike Maker horses. Just to kind of build on what you were saying, I really like all 3 of his races since the claim by Mike Maker. I know he's yet to hit the board in any of those races, but I thought he ran really well to be 4th in that Belmont Derby. That was a race that was dominated by horses that rode the rail. The top 3 finishers all did, and he was not far behind them, being off the rail through the entire race. He came back and that was just a roughly run Bryan Station at Keeneland, and he was still close at the end. And last time out, I think that was subtly the best effort that he's ever run in that Geoponte at Aqueduct. I know that the pace doesn't look slow, but that was a race where the flow just really went to horses that were up front. City Man and Bodie Cream were towards the lead throughout, and they just kind of ran away and didn't let anybody else get into the race. And A Journey to Freedom was the only horse that launched a big run from the back of the pack, and he was really finishing strongly at the end. The distance is obviously a question mark, but with Mike Maker, is it really? Because it seems like so often these horses stretch out and do it just fine. So he'd be my top pick in here as well, and he's supposed to be a bit of a price. And we totally agree about Marzo. I mean, far be it from me to criticize Sam Houston morning line maker Nick Tamaro, who does a very good job, but I feel like this horse is supposed to be a much shorter price, but maybe I'm just kind of too willingly ignoring his last 2 races, and others might put more stock in them. I just think he's got huge excuses for both of those races. What's to say that he's supposed to like a synthetic track? And he ran in that incredible bog in the Sword Dancer 2-back, so he had a right not to like that either. And before that, his form looks pretty similar to Spooky Channel as the morning line favorites, so I just think Marzo makes a lot of sense in here as well, and they'd be my top 2 picks.
Yeah, just a couple things. You make a good point about, I want to give a shout out to Nick Tamaro because since he's taken over, the morning line has gotten a lot better at Sam Houston. It wasn't very good in the past, and he does a good job. We're always going to disagree with some here or there, and I would agree with you. I don't think Marzo will be 10-1, but it's, as you know better than anyone, a pretty thankless job making the morning line, but both you guys do a really good job at it. I did want to cover Spooky Channel just a little bit since he is going to be the favorite in here. He's a horse, if you just look at his record, he's 8 for 17, but I think it's worth noting that most of those wins came earlier in his career. If you look, he's only 2 for his last 9 races that he's won. Oftentimes he's never really a heavy favorite or anything. Sometimes he's even a bit of a price in here, but what really stuck out to me is when he doesn't win, he's usually nowhere. In those 7 of those last 9 starts, he's been off the board, not particularly close. So I want no parts of him at a short price. And I wasn't all that impressed by his return either. A race which completely fell apart, and he wasn't able to make up very much ground.
Yeah, we're have a very similar take on him. I think people might be a little fooled by both the career record you mentioned and his current form, and also I'm not convinced that he's really best going these marathon distances. I know that they keep running him these races because he won that week edition of the WL McKnight back on Pegasus World Cup Day last year, but I really think his better efforts come going a little shorter than this. So I just think he could be a little vulnerable to short price. So I would certainly use him in conjunction with those 2 Mike Maker horses, but I think that's where the value really lies with the Journey to Freedom and Marzo.
Yeah, last thing, as I sit here, look at this card and we talk about it, I may very well try to talk my wife into making the 6-hour drive to Houston. I'm pretty sure they're allowing fans, but I'll have to double check on that. But it really does look like a good, strong card. It's just I wish it wasn't a Sunday night. If it was a Saturday night, it'd be a no-brainer. I'd probably be on the way.
Yeah, if it's nice weather and you don't mind a little drive, I'm sure that would be a nice night out. It's a great card of races. We're only talking about 2 of them, but there were plenty of them that we could have mentioned. These just look like 2 of the more wide open ones. Well, that's all the racing to handicap this weekend. Hopefully we gave out some good opinions, and we'll recap all of this when we do the TimeformUS Pacecast next Tuesday. Thanks everybody for listening. Remember, you can always catch us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to that Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure to catch the TimeformUS Pacecast on Tuesday.